Hello everyone and welcome back. This is our 11th session, including the sessions we did live on Zoom earlier. Today what we're going to do is focus on moving a little quicker because we've done several questions of this nature. We are going to move a little faster. We're going to cover 3 questions. Each one, like previously, is similar in many respects, but also different in some ways as well. So we're going to go through these 3 questions, and then I'm going to leave you with 2 more questions to complete on your own. We are going to go a little faster today because we should be getting used to this. If you've been working through the problems and following the videos, you should have no problems. If you do have problems, always feel free to contact me. You can always reach out to me and ask for more help if you are in need of, in many situations, some clarification on exactly what's happening. So without further ado, let's begin. This is practice problem number 6 from our lessons. A junior student earns $20,000 during her summer internship. Since she plans to pursue graduate studies next spring, she wants to invest all her earnings in an annual tax saver scheme and a non-tax saver plan. The tax saver plan yields a return of 8% with a risk score of 3. The non-tax saver returns 10% with a risk score of 5. To use the tax exemption, the student has to invest at least 50% of her investment in the tax saver plan. A finance professor advises the student to keep her average risk score no higher than 3.6. How does the junior student maximize the return on her investment? So as always, we'll begin by looking for our decision variables. So we see here in the last section, how does the junior student maximize the return on her investment? Looking up here, she can invest all of her earnings in an annual tax saver scheme and a non-tax saver plan. So that indicates our choices are tax saver or non-tax saver. Those become our decision variables. Because we're moving a little quicker, we'll go right to that now. So we have X1 is our tax saver plan, X2 is our non-tax saver plan. Any money, each represents how much money will be invested in each respective plan. Now, once we have that, we have to relate our ultimate goal, which is maximize return on investment. Our ultimate goal is to do that. So we have to relate our decision variables to our ultimate goal. Our return on investment is our ultimate goal. So we see here, tax saver yields a return of 8%. Non-tax saver returns 10%. So this allows us now to relate our ultimate goal of return on investment to our decision variables, which are tax saver and non-tax saver. So in this situation, now we can complete our objective function. We know we're trying to maximize Z, which is ROI, return on investment, equal to 0.08 X1 plus, and that's ROI with tax saver, plus 0.10 or 0.1 X2, and that's ROI with non-tax saver. So we have 2 situations here. We have, if we are investing with the tax saver, we return 8% of the money invested in it. And if we are investing with the non-tax saver, we return 10% of the money invested in it. That's what we've done here. Okay, and I'm just going to minimize this to get everything on the same line. Now we have to go in, and we're looking here. What is governing our choices? So we see, to use the tax exemption, the student has to invest, that's a limitation, has to invest 50% in the tax saver plan. So that is one limitation, because it is not a choice, it's something we must do. If we do not do it, we cannot accept any possible solution that does not do this. A finance professor advises the student to keep her average risk score no higher than 3.6. No higher than 3.6. If it's above 3.6, it's not a valid choice. So we see here we have not one, but two constraints in this situation. The first one, we have to invest at least 50% in the tax saver plan. The second, the average risk score must be no higher than 3.6. So where do we find our 50%? Right here. We're investing 20. So that's where the 50% is relevant. Where do we find our risk score? Risk score of 3. Risk score of 5. So in both situations, now we can complete our constraints. Constraint number 1, we'll do risk. So we know it's a risk score of 3 for x1. So 3x1 plus, and we know it's 5 for the non-tax saver, 5x2 must be less than or equal to, because no higher than 3.6. And our second constraint is return on it, or we have to invest 50% in tax saver plan. We know that our tax saver, we have 20,000 to invest. So this becomes very easy. X1, which is our investments in the tax saver, must be greater than or equal to $10,000. If it's less than $10,000, we're not investing 50% in the tax saver. There are other ways we can write this equation, but this is simple in this situation. Again, a lot of this forces you to use your brain and think about how to represent natural language mathematically. In this situation, we know 20,000 is being invested. We know 50% of 20,000 is 10,000. So x1 very simply must be greater than or equal to 10,000. So this is all of our critical information collected in one place. Our final step for question number 1 is writing all of this information in our final universal problem formulation format. So maximize z is equal to 0.08 x1 plus 0.10 x2, subject to our first constraint, 3x1 plus 5x2 must be less than or equal to 3.6. And our second constraint, x1 must be greater than or equal to 10,000. We don't even need the zero or the comma. So now we've converted our natural language problem into our final solution format. From here, we could then solve this problem and determine our optimal choices in terms of investment in our tax saver or non-tax saver plan. As always, if you have questions, feel free to contact me through Kakao. Moving on to question number 2. As I said, we have been doing this for a while now. We've practiced quite a few questions together. You've done some on your own. So we are moving faster because I do expect that you are following along, and if not, that you will reach out to me for help to help you solve these problems. So let's move on to question number 7. The Elixir Drug Company produces a drug from 2 ingredients. Each ingredient contains the same 3 antibiotics in different proportions. 1 gram of ingredient 1 contributes 3 units, and 1 gram of ingredient 2 contributes 1 unit of antibiotic 1. The drug requires 6 units. At least 4 units of antibiotic 2 are required, and the ingredients contribute 1 unit each per gram. At least 12 units of antibiotic 3 are required. A gram of ingredient 1 contributes 2 units, and a gram of ingredient 2 contributes 6 units. The cost for a gram of ingredient 1 is $80. The cost for a gram of ingredient 2 is $50. The company wants to determine the number of grams of each ingredient that must go into the drug in order to meet the antibiotic requirements at the minimum cost. So, what we see in this problem is that the information is not really given to us in the universal, always identical format. Instead, it kind of changes things around, so we have to read clearly. So as always, let's look at what the company is trying to determine. And usually you can find in the first and the last sentence the key pieces of information. So here, they produce a drug from 2 ingredients. That seems important. The company wants to determine the number of grams of each ingredient. There is our decision variables. These are our decision variables. So we move over here, our decision variables. Now, in this situation, the decision variables don't have a name. They're quite simply ingredient 1, ingredient 2. And that doesn't matter. It's not the name that's important. It's the mathematical process we use to determine optimal choices that is important. So let's look. Ingredient 1, and that's the number of grams of ingredient 1 that they will buy. And x2 is equal to ingredient 2, and that's the number of grams of ingredient 2 to buy. Now we come down here and we have to find our objective function. And our objective function is relating our decision variables, in this situation ingredient 1, ingredient 2, to our ultimate objective. And our ultimate objective is meeting the antibiotic requirements at the minimum cost. So our objective function becomes minimize z, and that's cost, equal to 80 x1 cost per gram ingredient 1 plus 50 x2, and that's cost per gram ingredient 2. So now we have our minimization function, our objective function. And we've related our ingredient choices to their cost, and we're trying to minimize cost. So we've completed the objective function. Now we have to go in and we have to look at our constraints in this situation. What are our limitations? What do we require? So 1 gram of ingredient 1 contributes 3 units. 1 gram of ingredient 2 contributes 1 unit. The drug requires 6 units. 6 units of antibiotic 1. So we're going to go back to what we did last time, and we're going to change up how we do our constraints by starting with 6, and that's minimum units of antibiotic 1. That's our first constraint. Now, the ingredient, at least 4 units of antibiotic 2 are required. That's also a requirement. So we go here, 4, and that's minimum units of antibiotic 2. Finally, at least 12 units of antibiotic 3 are required. And this is our final constraint. So we come down here, 12, and that's minimum units of antibiotic 3. Now, we have to figure out how much ingredient 1 contributes to each of these and how much ingredient 2 contributes to each of these. So x1 plus blank x2 greater than or equal to 6. x1 plus blank x2 greater than or equal to 4. And we're going to find the parameters for x1 and x2 momentarily. I'm just creating the formula for ease of viewing. Oh. Now, let's see for ingredient 1. Ingredient 1 is x1. So we come up here and we see 1 gram of ingredient 1 contributes 3 units of antibiotic 1. So we come down here and it's 3x1. 1 gram of ingredient 1 contributes, 1 gram of ingredient 2 contributes 1 unit. So we come down here and we have 1. Now we know how we get to our requirements for antibiotic 1. We'll do the same thing again. The drug requires at least 4 units of antibiotic 2 are required, and the ingredients contribute 1 unit of each per gram. So x1 and x2 are 1. 1x1 plus 1x2 equal to 4. Greater than or equal to 4. So the final thing we have to do is we come up here. At least 12 units of antibiotic 3 are required. A gram of ingredient 1 contributes 2 units. And a gram of ingredient 2 contributes 6 units. So we have 2x1 plus 6x2. Greater than or equal to 12. So we have now very simply gone through practice problem 7, found all of our relevant information, collected it all in one space. Our final step then is to take all this information and write everything in our universal problem format. We're trying to minimize z equal to 80x1 plus 50x2, subject to 3x1 plus 1x2 is greater than or equal to 6. 1x1 plus 1x2 is greater than or equal to 4, and 2x1 plus 6x2 is greater than or equal to 12. So this is our final problem formulation. From this step, using algebraic principles and linear programming methodology, we can solve and determine our optimal number of grams of unit 1 and our optimal number of grams of unit 2 to buy. Again, if you have any questions, as always, please reach out to me through Kakao, and I will solve this for you. Or I will help you solve it. Sorry, not solve it for you. And the last question we're going to review today before I assign you your 2 homework problems is practice problem number 8. The Valley Wine Company produces 2 kinds of wine. That seems important. Valley Nectar and Valley Red. The wines are produced from 64 tons of grapes the company has acquired this season. A 1,000-gallon batch of nectar requires 4 tons of grapes. A batch of red requires 8 tons of grapes. However, production is limited by the availability of only 50 cubic yards of storage space for aging and 120 hours of processing time. A batch of each type of wine requires 5 cubic yards of storage space. The processing time for a batch of nectar is 15 hours, and the processing time for a batch of red is 8 hours. Demand for each type of wine is limited to 7 batches. The profit for a batch of nectar is $9,000, and for a batch of red is $12,000. The company wants to determine the number of 1,000-gallon batches of nectar and red to produce in order to maximize profit. So what we will do very simply is go through this and find first our decision variables. Let's check the first and last sentence. Valley Red Wine Company produces 2 kinds of wine, Valley Nectar and Valley Red. To the last sentence, the company wants to determine the number of batches of nectar and red to produce in order to maximize profit. So we see that we are determining how much nectar and how much red to produce. Those become our decision variables. This is the number of batches of nectar to produce. And this is the number of batches of red to produce. So we come back in and we have to relate our ultimate objective, maximizing profit, with our decision variables. So we see the profit for a batch of nectar is 9,000, and for a batch of red is 12,000. So we have now our objective function. Maximize Z profit equal to 9,000 x1 profit per batch nectar plus 12,000 x2, and that's profit per batch red. Now, we've completed the first 2 steps. We have to go back in and check for constraints in this situation. So what we're going to do this time is, as we find constraints, we'll come back here and we'll list them. There are 64 tons of grapes. Nectar requires 4 tons. Red requires 8 tons. That's our first constraint. So we have 4x1 plus 8x2 must be less than or equal to 64. And that is the tons of grapes available. Very simple. Oh, I made one mistake here. That's 4. All right, we come back in, we check again. Production is limited by 50 cubic yards of storage space. Each type of wine requires 5 yards of storage space. That's our second constraint. So in this situation, 5x1 plus 5x2 less than or equal to the 50 yards of storage space available. The next section, we come back up. The processing time for a batch of nectar is 15 hours. Batch of red is 8 hours. And we have 120 hours of processing time. That's our third constraint. So we have 8x1 plus 15x2 less than or equal to 120. And that's hours of processing time available. We're almost there. Demand for each type of wine is limited to 7 batches. Now this is because they're separate. Red is 7, nectar is 7. So in that situation, it's 2 separate constraints. So x1, demand for nectar, is less than or equal to 7 batches. And that's demand for nectar. And x2 is less than or equal to 7 because that is demand for red. We check and we have covered all of the critical information. So this is our problem this is all of the critical information for practice problem number 7. Our final step then is to come down and write all of this in the correct problem formulation format. Maximize Z is profit, and that's equal to 9,000 x1 plus 12,000 x2, subject to first constraint, and that's 4x1 plus 8x2 is less than or equal to 64. Our second constraint, 5x1 plus 5x2 less than or equal to the 50 yards of storage space. 8x1 plus 15x2 less than or equal to 120 hours of processing time available. X1 is less than or equal to 7, and that's the demand for nectar. X2 less than or equal to 7, and that is the demand for red wine. So we've now taken our natural language problem and we've converted it here to the correct problem formulation format that we would then be allowed or then be able to solve using algebraic problem solving techniques and linear programming problem techniques. Thank you everyone for listening. These were 3 problems. We worked through them faster because, as I said, we should be getting used to this. I'm going to leave you with 2 problems for homework. Both of those problems will be relevant to your attendance quiz. So once you've finished watching these problems, please go back in and complete those problems following the techniques that we've discussed here. Thank you everyone for watching. I'll see you next time.